I'm going to go through this topic. All right, so what we're doing today, ladies, is that we're going to recap some of the things that were done in the presentation. And the presentation, one of the presentation actually looked at free villages and peasantry, right? And so what are free villages? So we know for sure that free villages were settlements that were established by the ex-enslaved. Peasantry is a mode of production, how people would have produced their goods, right? The persons who were peasants were actually, uh, sorry, the persons who were involved in peasantry were called peasants. So that is the first thing. Next, ladies, what led to the development of peasantry and free village? Peasantry, you really cannot separate peasantry from free village because it's once free villages were established, people have backyards to plant their different crops and all of these different stuff, so uh, they can produce goods, right? So both of them are basically not really interchangeable, but they are linked. A reason for the development of peasantry and free village is that one, people desire to move away from the plantation. So once slavery came to an end, some persons want to move away from the plantation. The horrors of the plantation, the memory of the plantation. Some people just decide that we're going to leave the plantation and they establish villages. Some of the villages were illegal settlements, some were legal settlements, right? Also, after slavery ended, there was a demand for new crops. New crops in the islands, new crops around the Caribbean, new crops in the UK, new crops in the US, new crops all around. So there was a demand for new crops. Another reason why free villages were established was actually because of the disintegration of the plantation, meaning that some of the planters after slavery ended, they were in financial bankruptcy. And so because they were in financial bankruptcy, the planters the planters sold their plantation. And if you're going to sell a plantation, then anybody who is living on the plantation, the former enslaved people, because remember this was immediately after slavery ended, the former enslaved people, they have to move. They don't care where they are going to live. You just need to leave the property before the new owner takes over. So in addition, free villages were established because of the availability of lands in some territories. So, for example, like British Guyana, Dominica, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, there was quite a lot of land. So, once slavery ended, people could move to other parts of the islands or the British Guyana, which is not an island, a mainland territory, and establish settlements over the different parts. Even today, if you look in Jamaica, there's a lot of land that people don't live on today. A lot of lands that people don't live on today. So there's a lot of land still in Jamaica. British Guyana that have about, which is now Guyana, have about 100,000 people. And they have a lot of land in British Guyana. Well, in Guyana today, because once they got independence, they changed the name from British Guyana to Guyana. All right. So we know for sure that lands were available. So that contributed to the development of peasantry and free village. Also, another reason was the assistance that were given by the missionaries. You go to church, you're a member of the church. Once you go to the church, the pastor is going to say, you come here and tell the pastor, say, listen, I used to live on this plantation, and you know that the planters sell the estate, I have nowhere to live. Pastor I can stay in one of the rooms in the church, or another example is that when it comes to the churches, they are saying that quite a lot of their members don't have anywhere to live. And so the missionaries, especially from the Baptist church in Jamaica, they are going to help them. They are going to help the we call it, they are going to help the ex-enslaved people or the former enslaved people, what we are now consider, we call them the peasants, to purchase land. So what they're going to do is that the church, they are going to borrow money from their head church or the headquarters in England at the time. And what they're going to do is that they're going to use the money that they borrowed, and they are going to buy lands in the Caribbean, and they are going to divide those lands for their members. One example of that, Williams Knibb, he established Searchtown in Trelawney, and James Phillips, who would have established Sligoville in St. Catherine. Sligoville was actually the first, very, very first free village to be established in Jamaica. Go ahead for me, Jackson.
Sir,
Did
the
you?
missionaries also realized that, like after enslavement, the planters didn't want the ex-slaves to leave. So, sir,
Go ahead, yes.
so what they did was they placed restrictions on land, so it made it harder for them to acquire. So one thing is that you have to have a title for the land, and you have to be able to read. And most of the ex-slaves couldn't read, so they couldn't buy land. So what the missionaries would do, they would buy the title and then distribute the land for the ex-slaves.
Yes, and you are correct. Very, very correct. Which brings us to the next point here, that the planters, as you have just mentioned, some of the planters who had their plantation, who they were not in any much, they were in difficulties, but they wanted the enslaved people to remain on the plantation. Some of those planters would have advocated for quite a lot of increase when it comes to the price of land, and also increase in taxation. So that would have prevented the ex-enslaved from moving off the plantation. So for example, in Barbados, the land was increased, the price of land was increased in Barbados from 60 pounds per acre to 200 pounds. Jamaica, 4 pounds to 20 pounds. And in British Guiana, 1 pound to 50 pounds. That is a major increase when it comes to the price of land. So you are correct when it comes to that point. The other thing is that the planters, they didn't like the idea of the ex-enslaved having any form of independence. They wanted, which is the same point that Deidre Jackson would have mentioned, the ex-enslaved people, the planters wanted them to remain dependent on them. But at the same time, we have two phenomena, two things taking place. Some planters evicting the ex-enslaved people. Some of the ex-enslaved people leaving the plantation. And at the same time, the planters who controlled the government at the time, they were increasing the prices for land, and also increase the tax on the properties. And also they also passed law squatting act, with that said that people could not squat. People still squat, especially in Jamaica today. Squatting is very prevalent. Even up until today, people go and take over people's place. All right. And so we know for sure that peasantry and free villages were established, and those were the factors that uh, contributed to the development of peasantry. Now, The peasant ladies as a group who presented on this topic mentioned that there were several economic activities of the peasants. So the peasants were involved in fishing, some were involved in farming, some were involved in trading, some were involved in shopkeeping, craft making, animal rearing. So any little thing that they got their hand on, the former enslaved people did that in order to survive. But what were some of the contributions now of the peasants? Peasantry would have, one of the main things that peasants would have done, while they diversified the jobs opportunity, because people created a lot of jobs. So instead of you have only farmers, you have now people like fishermen, craftsmen, all of these different persons, right? One of the activities that the peasants would have done is that some markets in Jamaica some of the markets were not developed during slavery. Some of them were developed after slavery. And so markets were developed. So for example, you have one of the peasants, just have example, a peasant might say, all right, I have some tomato that I want to sell. I go to this spot and I'm going to sell the tomato. Somebody else come and said, all right, I see Miss Jane down the road selling tomato. That's what somebody else bring the banana right next to her. And so what you have is that markets were being developed as a result of the peasants. Another thing is that the peasants, because they are producing so much goods, right? What they are doing is that they are going to export some of those goods. And so they are going to contribute significantly to export in the Caribbean. But another factor or contribution of the peasants were that the peasants are going to modernize the society. What do we mean by modernization? They are going to develop, just like how you hear that the Prime Minister is building roads and it is modernization or development. Although some people make it seem as if roads were not always being built in Jamaica. But when it comes to the peasants, what they are doing is that once the free villages were established, they are going to pave the roads in the free villages. They are going to establish things like school. And once you have a school, they're going to have a church. Because most of these places where the missionaries help them say you have to put a church there. And most church is going to have a school, right? Because even if you look into your own communities today, almost every single church have a basic school attached to it. And so they are going, even with your church, your school, your school is a church school. And so they are going to modernize the society. And also the peasants, because they are earning money from the market and export, they are going to build very nice homes. You're not going to see like wealthy homes, but good structure homes you're going to build. Another development of the peasants is that they're going to form credit unions or different societies that will aid when it comes to funding. Why? Because some of the peasants are making a lot of money from the goods that they're producing, and the banks refuse to give them loans and also refuse to bank their money. Barclays Bank and Scotia Bank, perfect example. They didn't want the peasants to bank, so the peasants are to give blacks to lend them any money. And so what they're going to do is that they're going to form their own little financial institutions so they could save their money and also that they could borrow money from. Uh, another contributions of the peasants was that the peasants would have contributed to the enfranchisement of workers uh, because they owned land. And if you own land at this time, you had the right to vote. This was right up until the 1860s, late. So right up until the 1860s, land ownership was a requirement to vote. If you didn't own land, you could not vote. And so because the church is helping the peasants to own land, a lot, and they're also exporting where they are making money, a lot of Jamaicans or peasants across the Caribbean are now being able to run for office. So, for example, 50,000 freeholders in Jamaica put forward black candidates for election in 1860. In 1860, you have black people in Jamaica who were actually running for office because running for government position to be members of the legislature because of the fact that they owned land right up to 1860. Now, the peasants also would have diversified the economy because in Jamaica, you had in addition to sugarcane, you have things like ginger, banana, coconut. In St. Vincent, you have arrowroots. In British Guiana, you have rice. In Dominica, lime, oranges, coconut, Grenada, nutmeg, cinnamon, pimento, and ginger. So you have all of these different goods that are producing at very large scale in these territories, that in fact Grenada became one of the world's largest producer of nutmeg, right? Beating uh, places in, we call that place again? The countries in the East Indies. Now, ladies, so we are now through with free villages and peasantry. The next group presented on the Morant Bay Rebellion. And so what I'm going to discuss now is movements towards independence. What were the different factors that led to independence? All right? And some of the different factors that why we are independent today, why Jamaica is independent, why Barbados is independent, why Trinidad is independent, St. Vincent, Grenada, why all of these territories are independent today were largely linked to some of these factors. For example, the Morant Bay Rebellion that happened in 1865, the Marcus Garvey movement, the labor rights of the 1930s, internal self-government, the West Indian Federation, until the 1960s that we had full self-government. Full self-government is synonymous to independence. Now let us look at Morant Bay Rebellion. We know that immediately after slavery, that free villages were established, peasantry was growing as a form of production. Planters didn't like it, but at the same time, the conditions in Jamaica was very, very poor. Not only Jamaica, but right across the Caribbean. The conditions were poor across the Caribbean. And in fact, the only way you could have been elected or you could vote was through the ownership of property. If you didn't have property, you could not vote. Right now in Jamaica, you don't need to own even the well, a mentally ill person can't vote. But in Jamaica, you can live on the street and you can go and vote. Anybody can vote right now. In the last election, less than 30% of the country went out and vote. In fact, we have a population of 3 million people in Jamaica today. And how many persons are who are able to vote? 1.8 million people are allowed to vote. And in Jamaica, less than 800,000 people would have voted in the last election, which means that 1.2 or 1.1 million people did not vote. So the majority of the people in the country, over 60% of the country, did not vote. But during the 1860s in Jamaica, the peasants, they didn't have land and they wanted the opportunity to vote. And as I would have mentioned before, that in the 1860 election in Jamaica, quite a lot of quite a lot of black persons who actually owned land and actually were becoming quite wealthy, they got the opportunity to go and vote, well, to be elected, well, to run for office, and also that over 50,000 of them could have been able to vote at the time. And so in the 1860s, what is going to happen after the Morant Bay Rebellion, that people are protesting the illiteracy rate, that people, it was very hard in the country to live. Food prices were constantly going up. So there was a lot of problems in the society. Cholera took place, disaster, all of these different stuff. And so the Morant Bay Rebellion happened, where they are going to burn down quite a lot of places in St. Thomas. And Paul Bogle was the leader of that rebellion. And so once the rebellion was put down, Britain is going to do a few things. One, Britain is going to abolish the Legislative Assembly, and that assembly was what people, which is like a parliament. So nobody was able to vote for anybody, or whether you're white, you're black, you're colored, you're mixed, you're yellow, you're pink, nobody was able to vote. And so Britain now going to establish direct rule, which is crown colony government. So Britain is going to rule directly from Britain. They're going to send the governor here, and the governor is going to decide who will sit with him in a council, who the governor called the Legislative Council, to manage the affairs of the colony. And so what is taking place here is that with the Britain having direct rule, abolishing the Legislative Assembly where people no longer have to vote, but the governor is the one who appoints who he wants to sit in the council, this is going to further disenfranchise blacks. And at the same time, about 10 years after, they would have implemented some positions that were elected positions. And so in order to get rid of blacks out of the system, where blacks, you don't have any black leader, you don't have blacks voting, they increase the acres of land, and also they would have had a literacy test. So in order for you to vote, you must pass the literacy test, and you must own a particular set of land. Why do you believe that they would have implemented a literacy test? Why a literacy test?
Sir, because they knew that most of the blacks couldn't read or write.
Very good. So you have, even today, you have very wealthy people, very wealthy Jamaicans or wealthy Caribbean people, and they have quite a lot of money, but some of them cannot read. and cannot write, and that's the fact. Because you can get your money from, you can inherit wealth from family members, and you can also do illegal things to get money. That don't mean say you're brilliant. Money don't mean that you're brilliant. All right? And so with that now, as a result of blacks being disenfranchised, meaning they don't have the right to vote or to be elected to office, black people now are going to agitate for voting rights. And one of the persons around the 1920s was J. Jag Smith. He was one of the first persons to criticize Crown Colony and say, listen, Crown Colony government, you implement Crown Colony government to say that you're helping us black people. But what Crown Colony government did was to take away our rights. Because some of us were actually owning land and were able to vote. And then you just get rid of that system. And most of the persons, well, all the persons that the governor appointed to help him to manage the colony, black are white people. And so, ladies, Morant Bay Rebellion is linked to independence because it is going to plant the seeds into the minds of the people that listen. In order to better our conditions in the Caribbean, we need to have voting rights. And it is a very long struggle for them from 1865 to 1960, very long struggle for the peasants. Another reason, ladies, why our factor that led to independence was the Marcus Garvey movement. So Marcus Garvey asked the question, where is the black man's government? Everybody have government. England have king and queen, America have this, the Jews have this, all of these different people have this. But where is the black man's government? And Garvey continued to say, where is his king and his kingdom? Where is his president? America have his president and the ambassadors, and they are all white and they represent the white interest in America. And so he's asking the question, where is the president? Where is his ambassador? Where is the black man country? Because even countries that have majority black people in it, the governor is white and those who are running the country is white. Who is going to control the affairs of the blacks? So that's one of the reasons why Marcus Garvey is a national hero today. Because Marcus Garvey was one of the persons who started to ask questions about who is going to govern us. And so Marcus Garvey did quite a lot of things. And then Marcus Garvey ended by saying, and then he declared and he said, I will help to make them. He's going to help to make the black man to create his government. And so Marcus Garvey advocated for voting rights for blacks. He established the Negro World magazine that helped to spread news about blacks and, black identity and all of these different stuff. He established the UNIA, the UNIA was established in North America, Africa, and the Caribbean. In fact, Cuba and Trinidad had more UNIA organized, groups than Jamaica. You don't have any honor in your own country. Can you imagine? And also, Marcus Garvey established one of the first political parties in Jamaica, which is the People's Progressive Party. And so all of these were actually done to help blacks in the Caribbean and in Jamaica, because Marcus Garvey was really not about Jamaica alone, Marcus Garvey was anywhere black man live, black man need to have their own government. He was Pan-Africanist. He was for all people of African descent. And so the And so, ladies, Marcus Garvey now, his role that he would have played and his movement would have also planted some other seeds when it comes to the independence movement. And Marcus Garvey was very influential. In fact, one of my lecturers is at UWI Caveville, because I went to Caveville campus. He said, he's in one of the lectures, he said to us that Marcus Garvey should be the national hero of the Caribbean. The entire Caribbean, not only national hero of Jamaica, but he should be a regional leader because of what Marcus Garvey, the role that Marcus Garvey would have played in restoring some form of dignity to Blackness. And so, ladies, Marcus Garvey contributed significantly to the independence movement in the Caribbean. Next, so we have the Morant Bay Rebellion that happened. Blacks were disenfranchised. Blacks started to agitate or advocate for voting rights. Marcus Garvey, they come asking, where's the black man government? Starting to do things for black people to take control of their government, right? Or take control of the government. Then, by the 1930s in the Caribbean, the same reason they were protesting in 1860 about the poor socio-economic conditions in the Caribbean are the very same reason they are going to protest in the 1930s. So, the blacks now in the Caribbean, all over the Caribbean, from Barbados to Antigua, St. Vincent, Trinidad, Jamaica, Belize, blacks all over the Caribbean, they are protesting the poor living condition because right up to the 1930s, people in Jamaica live in dirt floors. The houses, you have structure around it. The houses were made from mud, right? And the floor was actually dirt. The conditions of the workers were poor in Jamaica. Blacks could not work in certain places. You couldn't work in a post office if you were a black person, your skin color. Not today, nobody wants jobs in the post office. But back then, post office job was a big civil service job because post office was like the prestige that you have with being maybe a manager of Digicel. And so you couldn't, blacks were not able to work in the post office. Blacks were not able to have certain positions in the society. And so Caribbean people are rioting. And so the 1930s, we call them the 1930s labor riot or the 1930s labor rebellion, where blacks are starting to say, listen, enough is enough. And so at the end of that, the riot, Britain is going to say, oh, we don't understand what is taking place in the Caribbean. Let us send Lloyd Moyne to the Caribbean to investigate the reasons for the riot. And so the Moyne Commission was established to investigate what were the reasons why in the Caribbean you have all of these riots taking place. And the Moyne Commission, anybody should try and read that commission to see how horrible the conditions in the Caribbean were while Britain ruled these islands in the Caribbean. And so when people talk about we should have still remain British colonies, not because of what is going on in Cayman or the British Virgin Islands or those places, or because they need the British passport. Britain, while they rule the Caribbean, they rule the Caribbean with an iron fist, and they neglected the blacks in the Caribbean. They ruled with racism. They never improved the conditions of the people. Illiteracy in Jamaica, even when we got independence, over 80% of Jamaicans could not read nor write when we got independence. And it was similar across the Caribbean. The living conditions in the country was very poor. Access to water, access to housing, access to education. If we were still under Britain today, I could not be teaching you. I'm too black to be teaching you. I most say would not be in the school that you're in, because at the time when the British ruled, because your school, this was 5 years after your school started, 1925. Is 1925 your school? Let me just celebrate something. And so in 1925, when your school would have started, I think the same time Casey would have started. Most of the persons who attended the school were of a particular skin complexion. In fact, when black boys started to attend Jamaica College, the head boy said, Jamaica College has not gone to the dogs have come to Jamaica College. Blacks were not to be seen on the campus. Same thing with women. When black children started to attend these schools, it was a serious problem. They faced serious racism. And all of this happened under British rule. And so the Moyen Commission is going to say, all right, these were the reasons for the riots, but I'm going to make some recommendations. And he said, listen, Britain, you need to allow them pass laws that they can have trade unions. Purpose of trade unions, they are going to be able to defend the workers' rights, lobby for workers, allow them to form their political parties. And also give them internal self-government. Give them the right to vote. So Jamaica in 1944, adult suffrage was passed that gave them the rights to vote for their leaders. Now, internal self-government is different from self-government, or self-government is also called full self-government or independence. So in the 1950s, ladies, we experienced with self-government. So instead of the governor running the colony, who is going to run the colony? And I believe one of the group that did internal self-government, did an excellent job with explaining the historical factors that would have led to internal self-government. Internal self-government meant that they were still under British rule, so they had self-government under Britain. That's why it's internal. You were able to govern yourself while you are still British colony. Internal self-government. They were still British citizens. They still had British passport. They still sang the British national anthem. But the head of the government under internal was that persons were allowed to vote for their political parties, and the head of that political party became the leader of the country, and the leader was called a premier or chief minister. So what was the purpose of the elected members of the colony? The elected members were only in charge of domestic affairs. So they were in charge of health, education, water. Those were the things that they were in charge of. But things that had to do with security, or foreign affairs. They couldn't go and sign treaty with Cuba, or they couldn't go and sign treaty with America because they were still a colony. Britain was still in charge of those affairs, defense and foreign policy. And so what is taking place right here is what we call internal self-government. Internal self-government was also a factor that led to independence because it gave the middle class politicians like Bustamante, Eric Williams, Eric Williams, Grantley Adams, it gave them the experience on how to run a country. And so they are going to argue now and said, listen, we can run our own country because we had the opportunity of internal self-government. And so they are now going to advocate for independence. And when they're advocating for independence, they said, listen, one way we could get independence is if we form a federation, because Britain said, you guys are too small to get independence or full self-government. So what Britain did, what the Caribbean people did with the aid of Britain was that they said, we are going to form a federation, the British West Indian Federation. And the main aim of the British West Indian Federation was to prepare the islands for independence as one Caribbean country. So in the same way, ladies, in the same way that we have the United States of America that was made up of several different colonies joining together to have one government, had we gone the way of federation, today each island in the Caribbean, the British island, would have formed one government. So we'd have one flag, one national anthem. But because of the uppity of Jamaica, Jamaicans at the time, and still is, believe that they were better. With other factors, the Trinidadians were a major issue also, and the Barbadians were a major issue. Federation failed. And so Jamaica went independence on their own. Now, under independence, you have your own flag, your own nationality. You are no longer British citizens, but you are now Barbadian, Grenadians, Trinidadians, Jamaican. You are no longer British citizens. And you have your own national anthem. You sign your own treaties, foreign policy. You control your own country. And so the Caribbean countries, ladies, Jamaica and Trinidad, they were the first the British Caribbean country to gain their independence. Then Barbados and Ghana in 66, then Bahamas and Grenada, Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, Antigua, and St. Kitts. So this is why today in the Caribbean, you have Jamaicans, Trinidadian, Barbadian, Ghanaians, Bahamians, Grenadians, Dominican, Lucians, Vincentians, Antiguans, Kittitians, and Nibishans. And each of these different islands, they have their own prime minister, they have their own national anthem, they have their own national heroes because they have gained independence from Britain. Our question now, ladies, is to determine whether or not independence was, have we done well with the independent mandate that our ancestors have given to us or fought for? Because our ancestors would have fought for independence. They would have fought for it. And so some of the factors that would have led to independence for sure would have been internal self-government, the 1930s riot, Marcus Garvey, and the Morant Bay Rebellion. All of those. Go ahead.
Sir, can my group member present on Marcus Garvey now, please? Her internet was out.
Okay, but the other members in the class have a class right now. How long is the presentation?
It's just 5 minutes.
All right, go ahead.
Tajane, thank you.
Sir, could you allow me to share, please?
Yes, you may.
Jamaica, an uncrownable colony. Good day and welcome to JTBS News. Today on the news, we will be focusing on Crown Colony government and its impact on Black political participation. Later on the news, Marcus Garvey will be giving his critiques. I'm Tajane Bailey and we will be back with the news right after the break.
Jamaica.
Crown Colony, a British colony in which the Crown has the entire control of legislation and administration, as distinguished from one having a constitution and representative government. According to records, immediately after the rebellion, a great change took place in the government of the colony. The House of Assembly agreed to surrender all the rights and privileges it had enjoyed for over 200 years. It consented that Jamaica should be governed entirely by the British Crown in the future. Jamaica was a British colony from 1707 until 1962 when it became independent. Jamaica became a crown colony in 1866 when Sir John Peter Grant wielded the only real executive or legislative power. Now for the impact. Shania, over to you.
Crown Colony government brought its administrative establishment of British officials. The responsible officers of government were no longer locally recruited. Metropolitan control, always distantly acknowledged, now became a clear and prominent presence. This system of government lasted for 78 years and did not acknowledge the growing demand for representation in the government. Instead, strictly white men with comparatively high salaries and perquisites and their presumably better education were selected to govern. The administrators seemed to support a continual relevance of the old criteria. The people felt suppressed, as the voice of the majority were not.
And now, we will be discussing Marcus Garvey's UNIA as well as his critique on Crown Colony. The Universal Negro Improvement Association, otherwise known as UNIA, was created by Marcus Mosiah Garvey on July 15, 1914. This association represented the largest African American mass movement in history. Garvey began to spread a message of Black nationalism and the eventual return to Africa of all people of African descent. His brand of Black nationalism had three components: unity, pride in one's cultural heritage, and complete autonomy. Garvey believed that people of African descent return to our ancient homeland and create a great independent nation. Emphasizing unity between Africans and the African diaspora, he campaigned for an anti-European colonization and the political unification of the African continent. He hammered the idea of radical pride as he celebrated his African past and encouraged Black people to be proud of the way they looked and their culture. Garvey proclaimed, "Black is beautiful," long before it became popular in the 1960s. The UNIA's appeal and influence was felt not only in America, but in the Caribbean and throughout Africa.
Thanks for tuning in to JTBS News. I'm your host, Tajane Bailey, and remember to stay safe.
Thank you very much. Very good presentation, which actually solidify and cement some of the things that were actually said.
Sir.
All right. So, ladies, I believe you on Thursday. I'm expecting an excellent essay on Thursday. I'm expecting an excellent essay on movements to independence, that independence question, and also on but at the end of this session, ladies, maybe sometime this week, you have another true and false activity to do online, which is based on the presentation. All right, ladies, enjoy the rest of the day. See you tomorrow.
Same to you, sir.
Bye-bye.